Hi, my name is Pam Hart, and I'm the Executive Director here at the Center for Animal Law Studies. And joining me today is Delcianna Winders. Hi, Delcy.
Hello.
And Delcy is a professor and director of our Animal Law Litigation Clinic. And she's joining us today because we have several updates, particularly about one of your pieces of litigation against the USDA. And this case involves deregulation of pig slaughter as well as the acceleration of line speeds. Can you let us all know what this update has to do with?
Yeah, so this is an update in the very first lawsuit that the Animal Law Litigation Clinic filed. So back in December, we filed a lawsuit challenging the U.S. Department of Agriculture's new rule to deregulate pig slaughter by both removing any limits on how fast pigs could be slaughtered while simultaneously reducing government oversight inside of these slaughterhouses. And the USDA recently filed its response to our lawsuit, and that response was to ask the court to dismiss the lawsuit, contending that any harms flowing from the rule were purely speculative. And the agency argued that the harms flowing from the rule are speculative, despite the fact that it had determined that slaughterhouse is responsible for 93% of the pigs slaughtered in this country, would convert to the deregulatory system, and that in doing so, they would kill about 11.5 million more pigs every year. The agency also argued that these harms are speculative despite findings from its own Office of Inspector General that food safety is at a higher risk under the deregulatory system, and despite damning undercover footage documenting the harms to pigs and food safety under the deregulatory system. So the development is that we just filed our brief opposing that motion to dismiss, explaining in great detail why all the harms from the rule, harms to the organizations that we represent, harms to the environment, harms to food safety, and of course harms to the pigs themselves, are far from speculative. They are in fact imminent and in some instances already occurring. And in very exciting news, thanks to the Food Integrity Campaign at the Government Accountability Project, we were able to include with our brief a sworn statement from a current USDA inspector inside one of these high-speed slaughterhouses that details what a nightmare this is for food safety and for pigs.
Okay, so let's get into that right away. Can you tell us a little bit more about her statement, her observations, and why this is so critically important for this case?
Yeah, so the whistleblower, the very brave USDA inspector who still works inside this high-speed slaughterhouse, is named Jill Maurer. And this happens to be the same high-speed slaughterhouse in Minnesota that one of our clients, Plaintiff Animal Outlook, did an undercover investigation into a few years ago and documented horrific animal abuse as well as serious food safety concerns, like downed pigs being allowed to enter the food supply, pigs with ulcers that had green and yellow pus, etc. And Ms. Maurer's sworn statement confirms that nothing has changed. Things continue just as bad, if not worse, inside this high-speed slaughterhouse, which supplies about 5% of the pork products in the United States. So among other things, Ms. Maurer details how she has observed pigs who are driven to move at excess speeds because of the high-speed lines, and that they cry out sometimes when they are forced to move so quickly, that she's seen workers beat pigs so hard that they actually raise their paddles above their head in order to hit them. She's also observed an increase in pig carcasses with water from the scalding tank in their lungs. So after pigs are supposed to be rendered unconscious, their throats are slit, and then they're dropped into a boiling hot tank of scalding water. They're supposed to be dead at that point. And what her observations indicate is that these pigs may have still been breathing and conscious at the time they were dropped in the scalding tank. And that's consistent with things that Animal Outlook documented in its undercover video investigation as well. And even if one doesn't care about the treatment of animals, which I know most people do, polling shows that consistently, they should still be truly alarmed by Ms. Mauer's statement. She goes into detail about how under the deregulatory system, fecal contamination has increased, and pig species transmit a host of diseases that are transmissible to humans, some of them life-threatening. She also talks about how the number of diseased pigs entering the food supply has increased. And things like toenails, hair, and ulcers are increasingly allowed into the food supply. So Ms. Mauer says, and I think this is very compelling, that she would not eat pork products from a deregulated slaughterhouse like the one that she works in, and like the ones that will be supplying 93% of the pork products under the USDA's rule that we're challenging.
That is really incredible, and I really commend Ms. Mauer for coming forward and sharing these observations with us all. And you've been a litigator for a very long time. How common is it for someone like Ms. Mauer to come out and publicly speak about these types of lawsuits?
So I have been involved in more than a dozen lawsuits against the U.S. Department of Agriculture for its failure to adequately protect animals. And I have never before had a sworn statement of a current inspector in a case. It's very rare for them to be willing to go on the record in this way. Sometimes you will hear from inspectors who are disgruntled or not disgruntled, really appalled by the things that they see, and they'll want to speak out, but they're afraid to go on record. And what's so remarkable is that she is still working in this slaughterhouse, and she is taking the risk of speaking up. And notably, Ms. Mauer's attorney, Amanda Hitt, at the Food Integrity Campaign of the Government Accountability Project, has said Ms. Mauer is just the tip of the iceberg. She has heard from many other USDA inspectors about similar concerns, but they're not all willing to go on record.
And this development, it couldn't be more timely. We're seeing all over the place with the news that slaughterhouses are closing due to the fact that their workers are getting sick with COVID-19. So what does this say overall about these facilities, not only for farmed animals, but for the people who are working in these conditions?
Slaughterhouses are one of the most exploitative sites in this country, not just for the animals, but for the workers as well. Workers suffer really alarmingly high rates of injury, which are going to increase under the high-speed deregulatory system. And we're seeing that play out now with COVID-19. We have massive outbreaks at slaughterhouses, hundreds of slaughterhouse workers who have the illness, some who have died. And that's because they are working at facilities that don't just not offer sick leave, they actually penalize workers if they don't come into work, even if they're sick. So we had a woman who works at a slaughterhouse who died after she had stayed home sick for a couple of days, and then she was forced to come back into work. So these are horrible places for animals and for humans. All of the attention is on profit, and we really need to revamp this entire system.
Agreed. And in that light, lately we've been talking a lot about the link between wildlife exploitation and the current pandemic. Your clinic focuses exclusively on farmed animal issues and their protections, which also matters when we talk about pandemics. Can you share that link with us as well?
Yeah, it's huge. Factory farming is the number1 driver of zoonotic diseases, and the majority of human diseases now are in fact zoonotic. And there are a number of things at play, and because factory farms are encroaching on wild animal habitat, you can't cleanly separate the wild animal diseases and the livestock diseases. As factory farms encroach on habitat, we are increasing the transmission from wild animals to livestock who are being factory farmed, and then from livestock to human beings. In addition to that, factory farming breeds its own diseases because you have hundreds, thousands, millions of animals intensively confined in filthy conditions. So it's a breeding ground for diseases. These animals are being fed antibiotics, not to treat disease, but just to help speed growth. So that's increasing the number of diseases that are antibiotic resistant. So factory farming is a huge, huge, huge cesspool for diseases that can have and will continue to spread to humans. And just to give one example, it's almost certainly a US pig farm that gave rise to the 1918 flu pandemic.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. So for those of you who aren't familiar with our animal law litigation, like after listening and talking to you, Delcy, it's so critically important to note that you're not only advocating for farmed animals, but also people in the planet, and it's all interconnected, and your work is so important. And with that said, you know, you have been working at the clinic with your students since it launched in the fall. You've been zealous advocates for farmed animals. What's next on the horizon generally, but also specifically to the case that we started our conversation with?
Yeah, so specifically with this case, like I said, we just filed our brief opposing the USDA's motion to dismiss. And in addition to Ms. Mauer's declaration, we had 15 other declarations supporting that as well, even though our complaint alone was enough to defeat the motion to dismiss. And the government has until April 24th to respond to that brief. The next thing that we're turning to now is our case that was brought on behalf of downed pigs, pigs who are too sick or injured to stand or walk at slaughterhouses. The USDA has similarly moved to dismiss that case, and our brief opposing that motion to dismiss is due on May 13th. And while we are tirelessly working on this briefing, we are also developing some other cases, which I cannot talk about just yet, but we will be filing some new cases in the near future, and I hope folks will stay tuned both to what we're already working on and what is to come.
Thank you so much, Delcy. Is there anything else that I've missed or anything else that you want to add today before we call it?
I just want to underscore how dire these harms that we've been talking about are to pigs, to workers, to the environment, to food safety. It really can't be overstated. And, you know, if folks are still eating pork products, I think this is a really good moment to pay attention to what that means. We're talking about 93% of the pork products in this country coming out of a system where there is going to be very little oversight. And I would urge folks to reconsider their eating habits.
Great point. And thanks again for joining us today. I always enjoy our conversations, and I look forward to our next one. Thanks for joining us.
Thank you.
Bye, Delcy.